today is stress accumulation, acute, chronic, and what it's actually doing in your training. Now, this is a talk with information that frankly could be a full course, right? So what I'm going to look to do is give you a brief overview over the next 6 to 7 minutes, and hopefully you guys will get some good key parts to understand how to keep up with your training and progress things the right way for yourself or for your athletes. Now, every program that we've ever followed is built on one assumption, right? That the only stress your body has to deal with is the stress you put on it in the gym. That assumption is wrong, and it's costing people progress every single week, every single session, right? So today, I want to break down what stress actually is, physiologically, the difference between acute and chronic stress, and why your body doesn't care whether that stress comes from a barbell or from your inbox. So where this actually starts. Okay, so back in 1936, a physiologist named Hans Sale described something he called the general adaptation syndrome. It's still the foundation of how we understand training stress almost 90 years later. Sale found that the body responds to any stressor, doesn't matter what kind, in 3 stages, right? Stage 1 is the alarm stage. That's something disrupts your system and your body mobilizes to deal with it. Stage 2 is resistance. Your body adapts, builds capacity, and then gets better at handling that specific stressor. And then stage 3 is exhaustion, right? If the stressor doesn't stop or if it keeps stacking without enough recovery, your capacity to adapt collapses. That middle stage, resistance, is the entire reason training works, right? You apply a stressor, the body adapts upward, and you come back stronger. That's supercompensation. But stage 3 is a trap almost everyone falls into eventually, especially the more modalities you mix into your training, right? And it's where I want to spend most of that today because most people only think about stage 3 in terms of training volume, but it's much bigger than that. So acute stress, right? That's the stress that's supposed to happen. So let's start with just this acute stress, because that's the one that's actually good. Acute stress is short term, has a clear onset and clear end. And physiologically, it's driven by your sympathetic nervous system. So when you're under a heavy bar or finishing a hard interval, your body releases adrenaline and cortisol. Your heart rate spikes, blood gets shunted to working muscles, and your system goes into a temporary state of heightened output. This is not a malfunction. This is the mechanism. Acute stress is a stimulus. Without it, there's no signal for adaptation, no reason for the body to get stronger, more efficient, or more resilient. A hard training session is acute stress by design, and your body's built to absorb it, recover from it, and then come back with a higher ceiling. The key word there is recover, right? Acute stress only builds you up if it's followed by adequate recovery. That's the entire model: stress, recovery, adaptation. You miss that recovery piece, and the next stressor doesn't land on a system that's ready for it. It lands on a system that's still depleted. So that's going to bring us into chronic stress, the stress nobody's really programming for. And if you want to be honest, nobody really does, right? Chronic stress is different. This is where most training plans fall apart, not because the programming is bad, but because the programming only accounts for one input. Chronic stress is persistent. It doesn't have an endpoint, and it keeps your body just really all over the place, right? So instead of a short cortisol spike that comes back down, you get an elevated baseline that doesn't fully reset. That shows up from things that have nothing to do with the gym: financial pressure, a demanding job, poor sleep, relationship strain, caregiving, grief, even excitement and positive stress, right? A wedding, a move, a promotion still registers a system load. It still registers to the body. So here's what chronically elevated cortisol actually does. So physiologically, it suppresses the immune function so you get sick more often and recover slower from soft tissue damage. It disrupts sleep architecture, specifically deep sleep, which is exactly when most of us need for recovery and hormone regulation happens. It has a catabolic effect on tissue, meaning that it can work against the very muscle protein synthesis that we're trying to drive with our training. And it dysregulates blood sugar and appetite, which affects energy availability for the training in the first place. Now, none of that happens because we had one bad workout, right? It's happening because our system has been running in stage 2 or creeping towards stage 3 of that model for weeks, sometimes months, often without ever labeling it as stress because it doesn't feel like it's just our life. It's like what's happening. But our nervous system doesn't file it separately, right? So the part that almost nobody accounts for, it's all one account. This is the single most important idea in the whole talk. Our bodies do not have a separate stress bucket for training and a separate one for life, right? There's one nervous system, one axis that everything kind of regulates and revolves around, right? And when we have too much, we go what's called the allostatic load, the cumulative wear on the body from all the stress exposure added together, and it's not separated by any category. So that means that the acute stress of a brutal training session doesn't exist in isolation. If we're already carrying a high chronic stress load from work or life, that same training session is landing on a system that has less room to absorb it. The workout itself might be identical in one that you did 3 months ago, same weight, same rep, same conditioning piece. But if our baseline chronic stress is higher right now, that total load on a system isn't going to be the same. We're pulling from a smaller account. And this is exactly why sports scientists started looking at something called the acute to chronic workload ratio. Research, which is popularized by Tim Gabbett. Tim Gabbett is the leader here. He's wrote a ton of information on this, and he's someone that's really dug into this ratio of acute versus chronic stress load. And he's specifically looking at injury risk to athletes, right? And what his work found was, again and again, across different sports, the injury risk climbs sharply when the acute workload spikes relative to an athlete's chronic accumulated baseline. In other words, it's not the high training load by itself that causes breakdown. It's a mismatch between what we're asking the body to absorb right now and what it's actually built the capacity to handle based on its recent history. So now if we take that same principle and widen the lens past training load, life stress raises our baseline the same way undertrained volume does, right? So if our chronic load from sleep, from work, and from everything outside the gym is already elevated, our buffer for acute training stress just got smaller, even if that program on paper didn't change at all. And that's something that we really have to think about, right? So what do we actually have to do with this? A few things fall directly. First, recovery isn't just about the training that we did. It's about a total life load. So sleep, nutrition, stress management, they aren't supplementary to our program. They're part of the program's actual capacity. Second is autoregulation matters, meaning that our intensity volume on a given day should be able to be flexed based on where our total stress is actually sitting on that day from life. Third, monitoring tools like heart rate variability, resting heart rate trends, and even basic subjective wellness questions about like how do we sleep, how do we feel that day, how sore are we, they give us a window on what we need to pay attention to and where we're sitting at that day. The takeaway is simple. Even if the physiology behind it isn't, training stress and life stress are not separate systems. They're one system drawing from one finite pool of recovery capacity. We have to coach that pool, not just the workout, right? And the more we understand this as coach and programmers, the better programs we're going to put together for individuals, the better adaptation we're going to be able to drive them towards, because they're not just going to come into a constant beatdown depending upon where they're coming to us from a life situation. So I hope this helps. Like I said, this is something that we can dive more and more into. Tim Gabbett has a ton of research on this, so I highly recommend that you all check out his information, read things that he put together, and then continue to dive into how you're programming for the person in front of you based upon what sort of life cycle they're in. See you guys in the next talk.